Everyone refused to save the paralyzed alien warrior. Except this human soldier, the battlefield was silent, though it had not always been so. Smoke curled into the sky, painting it with streaks of gray and orange, and the echoes of conflict lingered in the air like a stubborn mist. Among the debris and shattered machines lay a figure that was once feared across the stars, a towering alien warrior, paralyzed from an injury that had ended more than just a fight. The warrior's limbs did not move as they once had, their strength now trapped beneath flesh that refused to obey. Around them, other soldiers of different species kept their distance, whispering in tones that mingled curiosity and fear. The alien had been a legend. Stories of their victories had reached even the distant corners of the galaxy. Entire fleets would tremble at the mention of their name. But now, lying in the dust, they were nothing more than a spectacle of weakness, a cautionary tale that the universe seemed determined to ignore. Everyone refused to help. No one would step forward. To do so would be dishonorable, a stain upon one's own reputation. Survival without strength was shameful, they said, and so they left the warrior alone, except one human. Lieutenant Kieran Vale had been assigned as a peacekeeper in the fractured star system, a human among aliens, observing without interfering, or at least that had been the mission. Kieran had seen enough of war to understand its cruel rules, but he did not share the same reverence for those rules. Honor was important, yes, but not if it meant leaving someone behind. He approached the fallen warrior carefully, taking slow, deliberate steps as he scanned the area. Eyes glinting behind his visor, he noticed the faintest signs of life. Breathing shallow but steady, eyes flicking beneath closed lids, small movements of the chest. The alien warrior had not expected help, at least not from any of their peers. And yet here was a human, calm and purposeful, kneeling beside them without hesitation. Kieran's voice was gentle, his tone unthreatening, even as he spoke words the alien could not fully understand. "I'm going to help you," he said simply. There was no question in his voice, no hesitation, just the certainty that survival was worth more than pride. The alien's eyes opened slowly, revealing a depth that Kieran could almost feel. There was intelligence there and pain, and somewhere buried deep fear. The alien species prided themselves on strength, on the ability to overcome any opponent. To be paralyzed was worse than death in their culture, and yet Kieran did not flinch. He adjusted the small equipment he carried, using it to stabilize the warrior's body without causing further harm. This was not about heroics or glory, it was about a choice. Kieran had made it and he would not turn back. Other observers noticed. At first they watched with quiet disdain, whispering to one another about the foolishness of humans. Then curiosity replaced scorn. The human did not follow their rules, did not seem to fear dishonor or mockery. They only acted with a steadfast resolve that was unfamiliar in the galaxy, a resolve that could not be bargained with or ignored. Some aliens who had spent centuries adhering to rigid traditions found themselves uncertain, unprepared for behavior that valued empathy over reputation. Hours passed. Kieran stayed by the aliens' side, talking to them in words that were sometimes simple, sometimes strange, but always deliberate. He did not push, did not demand, and yet he encouraged. The warrior listened. At first there was silence, broken only by the occasional sharp intake of breath. Gradually, small responses emerged, a twitch of a finger, a flicker of the eyes, a faint sound that could almost be considered a word. Kieran smiled faintly. Progress was slow, but it was real. It was enough. During these long hours, Kieran learned more than he could have anticipated. The alien warrior had seen centuries of conflict, had survived battles that had destroyed entire planets. Their mind was sharp, strategic, and filled with memories that spanned a lifetime. They had been a leader, a symbol of fear and respect, and now they were vulnerable. Kieran understood that to this warrior, vulnerability was an unfamiliar state, one they had never allowed themselves to feel. And yet here it was, and for the first time they were not alone. Other species began to take note. At first they mocked. "Why waste time?" they whispered among themselves. "The creature is useless now." But as hours turned into a day and the human refused to leave, the whispers changed. Some began to ask questions quietly, secretly watching the interaction. Others lingered at the edge of the battlefield, unsure whether to interfere or flee. Kieran did not care. He focused on one thing, the alien warrior's survival and the fragile spark of hope he could kindle. The first night was the hardest. Darkness fell over the scarred land, and the wind carried the smell of smoke and burnt metal. Kieran built a small shelter using equipment he carried, shielding the warrior from the elements. He spoke softly, telling stories of Earth, of human cities, of distant stars, of survival against impossible odds. At first, the alien did not respond. Then, slowly, a flicker of recognition passed across their face. They remembered, perhaps, that they were not yet finished, that life still had meaning even when strength had been stripped away. By the second day, progress was tangible. The alien could move a hand slightly, their voice was faint but intelligible, and their eyes carried a new light. Kieran continued his patient work, using methods that required no force, no confrontation, only attention and care. Each small success was a victory. Each acknowledgement from the warrior reinforced Kieran's belief that humans had a different kind of strength, one that did not rely on intimidation, dominance, or power, but on persistence, compassion, and faith in the value of life itself. News of Kieran's actions spread slowly through the observer ranks. Alien commanders debated whether to intervene. Some feared that allowing this behavior would undermine their strict codes. Others were fascinated. They had never seen such dedication, such refusal to abandon someone deemed useless. Even the warrior's own species began to reconsider their assumptions. Was honor really about strength? Or could honor exist in the choice to care when all else refused? By the third day, the alien warrior was responding more deliberately. Words formed slowly, phrases emerging that conveyed not only gratitude but thought, strategy, and observation. Kieran listened intently, recording insights and details that could prevent future disasters, that could preserve lives without a single act of aggression. The warrior, once a living weapon, had become a teacher, a source of wisdom made accessible only through patience and respect. Kieran's decision was not without tension. Other humans, observing from a distance, worried about protocols and safety. Other aliens felt scandalized. But he remained calm. Every interaction reinforced a simple truth. Helping someone when everyone else refuses is not weakness. It is a different kind of power, one that could change minds, societies, and even the galaxy itself. As the day ended, Kieran sat beside the alien warrior, watching the stars emerge in the darkened sky. The silence was comfortable now, filled not with fear but with possibility. The warrior spoke softly, their voice filled with a mixture of awe and recognition. "No one ever stayed," they said, their words slow, deliberate. "Why you?" Kieran shrugged lightly, a smile in his eyes. "Because leaving someone behind is never the right choice," he said. "Strength is not just what you can do alone, it's what you do for others, too." The warrior's eyes glimmered with something new. Perhaps hope, perhaps understanding, perhaps the beginning of change. Kieran did not need to know, the moment itself was enough. The battlefield around them could remain scorched and broken, the rules of honor could remain rigid, but here, in this quiet space, a different truth had taken root. Survival was not about dominance or fear, it was about choosing to stand when no one else would. And so, in the shadow of a universe that valued only power, a human soldier stayed. And in staying, they began to teach a lesson that might one day reshape the way countless civilizations understood what it truly meant to be strong. The sun rose slowly over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. Smoke and dust still hung in the air, but the day carried a strange calm, a quiet that had not existed before. Lieutenant Kieran Vale had spent the night beside the paralyzed alien warrior, watching over them, listening to the faint rhythms of their breathing, and ensuring they were safe from exposure or harm. Though Kieran had expected the morning to be just another day of careful care, he found that the warrior had changed. They were not only more alert, but also more aware, their eyes searching the world with a mixture of curiosity and thought. The warrior had begun speaking in simple phrases, words that were halting but deliberate. Kieran listened patiently, never interrupting, letting the alien find their voice in a world that had long rejected them. "Your way's different," the warrior said slowly, blinking against the morning light. "Why help when all leave?" Kieran smiled faintly, adjusting the makeshift shelter around them. "Because helping someone is the right thing to do. Strength is more than what you can do alone. It's also what you choose to do for others." The alien seemed to consider this, their eyes narrowing slightly as if analyzing every word. "Humans, strange," they said finally, "strong but not like us. "That's true," Kieran said. "We don't have the same rules. We believe that leaving someone behind is weakness, not strength. And we also believe that even those who seem broken can still matter." The warrior stayed silent after that, but Kieran could see the shift in their expression. It was subtle, but it was there, a faint understanding that life was not just about domination, fear, or honor. There was something else, something quietly powerful in the humans' refusal to abandon them. By midday, Kieran had begun helping the alien warrior with small movements, exercises to stimulate their limbs, not with force, but with careful guidance. The warrior resisted at first, their pride unwilling to cooperate. But Kieran persisted, patient and unyielding, showing that assistance did not mean humiliation. Slowly, tiny movements became more deliberate. Fingers flexed, toes twitched, and the warrior's gaze began to hold a spark that had not been there before. Other species continued to watch from a distance, unable to look away. Some still whispered in disapproval, certain that Kieran's actions were foolish. Others, however, began to understand. They saw the human's patience, the quiet attention, and the growing strength of the alien warrior, not physical strength, but mental resilience, insight, and trust. They began to question the rigid codes they had followed for centuries. Perhaps there was more to strength than they had believed. By the second day, the warrior was speaking more clearly. Their words were deliberate, sometimes halting, but filled with thought. They began sharing stories from their past, tales of battles fought and victories won, not as a boast but as lessons. Kieran listened, learning the warriors' strategies, their insights into diplomacy and leadership, and the ways they had survived when others had fallen. Each story was a treasure, each lesson a key that could unlock understanding across the fractured star systems. The human soldier took careful notes, not for glory but to preserve the knowledge. Kieran understood that the warrior, though paralyzed, could still contribute in ways that others had dismissed. The alien's mind was a weapon, sharper than any blade, and Kieran knew that unlocking it could prevent future conflicts without anyone needing to fight again. Word of Kieran's actions spread beyond the battlefield. Alien commanders, initially furious at the humans' defiance of cultural codes, began to take notice. Some were incredulous. "How can one human challenge centuries of tradition?" they asked among themselves. Others, more curious, began to wonder whether they had misunderstood strength all along. If a human could help a paralyzed warrior rise again, what did that say about their species? What did it say about the universe? The warrior began to speak with purpose now, offering insights into past wars, strategic maneuvers, and methods of avoiding unnecessary conflict. Their mind, once feared for its brilliance in destruction, was now a guide for understanding. Kieran facilitated this knowledge, translating it into ways that could be shared across species without the need for combat or coercion. Slowly, the warrior regained agency, not through muscle, but through intellect and trust. One afternoon, a group of alien observers approached cautiously. They had come to see the human and the warrior together, curious about the strange bond forming before their eyes. "Why persist?" one asked, their tone a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "The creature is powerless." Kieran met their gaze steadily. "Power is not only what you can do to others," he said. "It is also what you can do for them. You can destroy or dominate, or you can help someone rise. That is the difference." The observers did not immediately respond, but the warrior did. "This human teaches strength different," they said. "Not muscle or fear, but care and persistence." The words echoed among the aliens, and some of them, even if unwilling to admit it, began to reconsider their beliefs. Could honor be measured in compassion? Could strength exist in patience and empathy? The battlefield, once a place of fear and pride, had become a classroom, and Kieran, without intending to, had become a teacher. By the fourth day, small miracles were occurring. The warrior could move their arms, lift their head, and even take cautious steps with Kieran's support. Their voice, once faint and broken, was gaining clarity. With each success, the warrior's confidence grew, and with it, their influence over the observing aliens. They began sharing strategies, not for war, but for survival, cooperation, and understanding. The battlefield that had once been a place of abandonment was now alive with learning and reflection. Kieran remained patient throughout. They never rushed, never demanded, never sought recognition. Their strength lay in their constancy, in their belief that life was valuable no matter the circumstances. It was a lesson that even the most rigid alien cultures could not ignore. Slowly, even the harshest critics began to understand that there was a power in humanity that could not be measured by muscle, weaponry, or fear. It was quiet, steady, and transformative. The alien warrior spoke one evening as the stars emerged in the sky, their voice strong and deliberate. "You showed what I never understood, strength not alone. Strength is choose, care, choose, stand when others leave." Kieran nodded, sitting beside them as they watched the stars shimmer above. "It is not easy," they said, "but it is worth it, always worth it." The warrior looked at Kieran with eyes that were now bright with understanding and respect. Humans, strange but wise. Perhaps stronger than anyone thought. The word spread quickly. Alien leaders who had once condemned the human soldier for breaking tradition began to reconsider. If a human could inspire a paralyzed warrior to reclaim purpose, what might humanity accomplish across the galaxy? Slowly, seeds of change were planted, seeds that would grow long after Kieran had left the battlefield. In the final days, the warrior could stand on their own, guided but no longer dependent. Their mind was sharp, their will strong, and their perspective forever changed. They had seen what it meant to be valued not for power, but for life itself. Kieran had shown them that even when the world abandons you, someone can choose to stay, and that choice could change everything. When it was time to leave, Kieran prepared to depart quietly. The warrior, now able to walk and speak clearly, approached. "You saved me," they said. "Not just body but mind, spirit, I owe you." Kieran shook their head gently. "No one owes anyone. You saved yourself by accepting help. I only showed you that someone would stay. That is enough." The warrior nodded, understanding the depth of the lesson. "I will teach others. Strength, not fear, not domination, but care and persistence." And so Kieran left the battlefield, a lone human soldier who had defied every rule of honor and tradition, showing that true strength lies not in power but in compassion and persistence. Across the star systems, the story spread quietly at first, then with growing impact. Humanity's lesson, embodied in one soldier's simple choice to stay, began to reshape understanding, inspiring species across the galaxy to see that sometimes the greatest heroism lies not in conquest, but in refusing to abandon life when it is most fragile. The alien warrior watched Kieran's ship disappear into the stars, a sense of hope and renewal swelling within them. They had survived not because of their strength alone, but because someone had seen their value when no one else would. And that knowledge, that understanding would ripple across generations, teaching a lesson that strength, true strength, could come in the quietest, simplest acts of care. In the end, the battlefield was no longer just a place of ruin. It had become a testament to something greater, a testament to humanity, to the courage to stand when others would leave, and to the quiet power that changes minds, hearts, and worlds without firing a single weapon. The galaxy did not immediately notice the change. Systems were vast, stars scattered across endless darkness, and news traveled slowly in the regions where war and mistrust were the only constants. But small ripples were forming, and those who saw them first were those who had been present on the battlefield. The observers, the soldiers, and the leaders who had once scorned the human soldier, Lieutenant Kieran Vale. The alien warrior, once feared across worlds, had returned to their people with a new understanding. Their steps were measured, their gaze steady, and their mind filled with lessons they had learned during those quiet days with Kieran. They had survived not because of raw strength, but because someone had refused to leave them behind. The concept was foreign to their species, whose culture revered dominance, fear, and victory above all else. Yet the warrior had experienced it firsthand and now carried the knowledge like a torch. Upon returning to their home world, the warrior was met with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Elders and leaders had expected to see a defeated figure, one broken and humiliated. Instead, they found someone whole in a new way. The warrior did not flaunt their survival as a victory. They did not seek praise or reward. Instead, they spoke calmly, sharing stories of their time with the human soldier. "They stayed," the warrior said simply, addressing a council of leaders. "When everyone else left, one human stayed, not for honor, not for reward, but simply because leaving someone behind is not the way of life." The council murmured among themselves. Many found the story unbelievable. Some scoffed quietly, claiming it was a trick of memory or exaggeration. Yet the warrior's conviction was undeniable. Their words carried weight, and their presence commanded attention. Slowly, the council began to ask questions, challenging long-held beliefs about strength, honor, and survival. The warrior shared more than just stories of endurance. They spoke of patience, empathy, and the quiet power that comes from caring for others. They described the exercises Kieran had used to help them regain movement, the conversations that had rebuilt their confidence, and the trust that had grown between them. Strength, the warrior concluded, is not measured by the power of your limbs or the victories of your battles. True strength is measured by the choices you make when no one is watching, when everyone else has abandoned you. Some of the council members resisted. To them, Kieran's actions seemed reckless, perhaps even dangerous. How could survival without dominance or combat be considered strength? And yet the warrior had survived, and more than that, they had returned whole, capable of thinking, leading, and guiding their people in ways that brute force could never achieve. The warrior proposed a bold idea. They suggested that their species begin teaching new principles alongside traditional training. Young warriors would learn that compassion and persistence could be just as powerful as strength and skill. That leaving someone behind was a weakness, not a virtue. That understanding, guidance, and empathy were tools for survival, not signs of frailty. It was a difficult proposal, met with resistance and debate. But over time, the council began to see the truth in the warrior's words. They could not ignore the undeniable fact that a human soldier from a distant world had shown a path that resulted in survival, understanding, and wisdom, outcomes far beyond what the old rules had promised. Slowly, they began to incorporate these ideas into their teachings. Meanwhile, Kieran continued their journey through the stars, unaware at first of the ripple effect they had caused. Their mission had been simple: to observe, to intervene when necessary, and to maintain peace. Yet the choice to stay beside one fallen warrior had created a legacy that extended far beyond a single battlefield. Reports reached Kieran, initially through brief transmissions, then through longer messages. Entire systems were beginning to adopt new practices, inspired by a story of patience and care. The human soldier was humbled by this news. They had never sought recognition or fame. Their actions had been motivated by a simple belief in the value of life. Yet to hear that entire societies were reconsidering their definitions of strength because of one choice was almost overwhelming. And still, Kieran remained focused on the individual, knowing that real change began with small acts of courage and kindness. On the alien warrior's world, the effects were immediate. Young cadets who had once been taught to value only dominance and victory began showing interest in empathy exercises and teamwork challenges. Veterans who had long believed that leaving the weak behind was natural started questioning their own actions and attitudes. The warrior, once a symbol of fear, became a symbol of balance, strength guided by wisdom and compassion. One day, the warrior visited the site where they had been paralyzed, now a place of reflection rather than pain. The ground was scarred, the machines wrecked, but it no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a classroom, a place where lessons had been learned that could echo for generations. Standing there, the warrior thought of Kieran, of the quiet determination that had refused to abandon them. "They stayed," the warrior whispered, "even when no one else would." That is true strength. Across the galaxy, other species began noticing similar changes. Observers from distant worlds spoke of humans with a reputation for persistence, compassion, and unconventional courage. Stories spread not of their weapons, but of their choices. Stories that inspired, puzzled, and sometimes frustrated those who had never considered the quiet power of patience and care. Kieran, for their part, continued to move through the stars, quietly helping where help was needed. Their presence inspired confidence, not because of fear, but because of trust. People and aliens alike began to understand that the human way, simple, patient, empathetic, was a form of strength they could emulate. Kieran did not boast, did not demand recognition, and often left before the impact of their actions was fully understood. Yet the effect was always there, subtle but enduring, like a light that could not be extinguished. On the warrior's planet, a new training program was established. It focused not only on physical skill and combat strategy, but also on understanding, empathy, and persistence. Cadets learned to care for one another, to value life, and to recognize potential where others might see weakness. The warrior personally guided the program, sharing experiences and insights that were impossible to convey through theory alone. Each story, each lesson, carried the weight of lived experience, teaching that survival was not only about dominance but also about connection and care. Years passed, and the warrior became a revered figure, not for their previous feats of war, but for the change they inspired. Other species visiting the planet marveled at the transformation, and many took the lessons back to their own worlds. The galaxy, once dominated by fear and strict hierarchies, began to see cracks in the old order, openings for cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. And somewhere in the stars, Kira and Vale continued their journey. They encountered new challenges, new civilizations, and new individuals who needed guidance. Yet the story of the paralyzed warrior always stayed with them, a reminder that one choice, one act of courage and patience, could ripple through worlds and change the course of history. The alien warrior, now fully mobile and wise, occasionally communicated with Kieran. Through messages and transmissions, they shared updates on the programs, the young cadets, and the shifting attitudes across the galaxy. Each message was a small victory, a confirmation that the lesson of patience and care was spreading farther than either of them could have imagined. One day, the warrior received a visit from a delegation of alien leaders from a distant system. They came to learn, to understand, and to adopt the principles that Kieran had introduced through simple, steadfast action. The warrior guided them patiently, explaining the exercises, the philosophies, and the subtle ways in which strength could exist without domination. The delegation left inspired, carrying new ideas to their own people, planting seeds of change that would continue to grow. The galaxy was not transformed overnight. Change of this kind never is, but the foundations had been laid, the example set. One human soldier, acting out of simple conviction, had created ripples that would echo for generations. Strength was no longer measured solely in power, weapons, or fear. Across the stars, beings began to understand that true strength could be found in care, persistence, and the courage to stand beside those others have abandoned. And so, in quiet corners of the galaxy, in classrooms and training grounds, in councils and private conversations, Kieran's choice was remembered. The paralyzed alien warrior had been restored not only to life, but to influence, and their people had learned that survival and wisdom often walk hand in hand. The story spread, simple yet profound. When someone refuses to abandon life, when compassion guides action, the impact can be infinite. The stars themselves seem to reflect the lesson. They shone not as cold, distant points of light, but as markers of possibility. Every system had a chance to change, to reconsider what true strength meant. And across these systems, the story traveled, quiet at first, then stronger, carried by those who had witnessed it, those who had learned from it, and those who would never forget that one human soldier had refused to leave a paralyzed warrior behind. In the end, the galaxy understood something profound. It was not the weapons, the victories, or the fear that endured. It was the choice to care, the courage to persist, and the quiet power of refusing to abandon life. Lieutenant Kieran Vale's simple act had shifted the hearts and minds of countless beings. The paralyzed warrior had lived, learned, and taught, and through them, entire civilizations began to grow stronger in ways they had never imagined. The legacy was not in war or conquest. It was in understanding, in patience, and in the unwavering belief that even the smallest act of care could ripple across worlds, shaping the galaxy for generations to come. And somewhere in the quiet of space, Kieran continued their journey, unaware of how deeply their choice had changed the stars, yet content in knowing that one person, one decision could make all the difference. The galaxy was changing, though not in ways anyone could have predicted. Word of a single human soldier's decision to stay with a fallen alien warrior had traveled far beyond the battlefield, reaching systems where humans had never been seen. Ships carrying diplomats and scholars crossed interstellar distances to hear the story firsthand, to witness the strange, subtle power of patience, empathy, and persistence. Kieran Vale, the human soldier who had started it all, continued their journey through the stars, largely unaware of the expanding influence of their actions. The alien warrior, once paralyzed and abandoned, had returned to their people not only as a survivor, but as a teacher. Their home world had adopted new training methods, blending traditional strength exercises with lessons in care, patience, and teamwork. Cadets were encouraged to look after one another, to recognize potential in those others might overlook, and to understand that survival depended not only on skill but also on cooperation. The warrior's example had inspired a cultural shift, one that began to ripple outward across the galaxy. The first delegation from a distant system arrived unexpectedly. They were a species known for their rigid hierarchies, where rank and strength dictated all decisions. Their leaders had heard rumors of the human soldier and the paralyzed warrior and were intrigued, if skeptical. They expected to see weakness, failure, and perhaps a lesson in futility. Instead, they found wisdom. The warrior welcomed them with calm authority, demonstrating exercises that strengthened both mind and body, emphasizing patience, care, and observation over brute force. They explained how Kieran's simple acts had not only saved them, but had also unlocked their potential to contribute in ways that no physical victory could achieve. The delegation observed in silence, noting the subtle but undeniable transformation among the warrior's cadets and soldiers. Each student moved with purpose, not just power, and each interaction carried respect and understanding. Kieran arrived later, as if by coincidence, stepping quietly into the training hall. The alien leaders turned to see a human who carried no weapons, no symbols of rank, and yet emanated calm authority. Kieran spoke with gentle confidence, explaining the philosophy behind their actions. "Strength is not measured by what you can destroy," they said. "It is measured by what you can build, by what you can protect, and by how you choose to stand when others would leave." The delegation listened, some with disbelief, others with curiosity. They had spent lifetimes believing in dominance, fear, and hierarchical power. Here was a species that had thrived not through conquest, but through empathy, persistence, and the courage to act when no one else would. Slowly, understanding began to take root. Meanwhile, other human envoys, scientists, and peacekeepers began receiving reports from systems that had previously been hostile or indifferent to humans. Entire planets were reconsidering their approach to diplomacy, leadership, and survival. It was not through weapons, fleets, or intimidation that humans had made this impact, but through a single example of courage, patience, and moral clarity. The story spread quietly at first, whispered in council chambers and classrooms, then discussed openly in political forums and academic institutions. Back on the warrior's home planet, the changes were profound. Young cadets who had once been motivated only by personal gain or fear of failure now competed in exercises designed to foster teamwork and mutual support. Veterans who had once adhered strictly to the old ways began mentoring others in patience, care, and observation. Even elders who had doubted the warrior's message found themselves intrigued, observing the transformations with a mixture of pride and wonder. The alien warrior took Kieran's teachings to heart, often speaking of the human soldier as a guide, though Kieran themselves remained humble, insisting that the warrior's willingness to learn had been just as critical. Together, they led classes, workshops, and discussions on what it meant to be strong in a universe that often valued only fear and domination. Each lesson, each story, reinforced the central truth. True power lies not in dominance, but in the courage to act with care, even when it is difficult or inconvenient. As the years passed, the warrior became a central figure in a network of interstellar cooperation. Other species began sending observers, students, and envoys to learn from the programs established on the warrior's planet. Small but deliberate changes spread to neighboring systems. Protocols that emphasized empathy and conflict resolution, training regimens that balanced strength with patience, and cultural practices that valued the preservation of life over the glorification of victory. Kieran, meanwhile, continued their journey, visiting planets that had not yet encountered humans, witnessing the impact of the ripples that began with one small act. On each planet, they found communities struggling with conflict, misunderstanding, or fear. Kieran would intervene gently, offering guidance, listening, and demonstrating that patience and care could achieve what aggression never could. Wherever they went, the lesson was the same. Do not abandon life when it is vulnerable, and the results will ripple outward in ways that are impossible to measure. One day, Kieran returned to the original battlefield, the place where everything had begun. The landscape was still scarred, though the fire had long since faded. Where once there had been only ruin, there was now a small monument erected by the alien warrior's people. a tribute to the lesson learned there, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, a single act of compassion can change the course of lives. Kieran stood quietly, reflecting on how far the galaxy had come from that moment. The alien warrior appeared beside them, walking steadily without assistance. Their presence was calm, dignified, and full of the quiet confidence that comes from wisdom and understanding. "You came back," the warrior said, a faint smile on their lips. Kieran nodded. "I wanted to see how things had grown," they said. "It is remarkable to witness." The warrior looked out across the field, their gaze sweeping over the monument, the remnants of machines, and the signs of healing that had begun naturally over the years. "Not just remarkable," they said. "Transformative. The galaxy sees a new way now." "And it all began because you stayed when no one else would." Kieran shook their head gently. "It began because you accepted help. I only stayed, you did the rest." The warrior smiled, thoughtful. "Perhaps. But that choice, yours, gave us all the courage to rethink what strength means. That cannot be undone." Across the galaxy, systems continued to change. Civilizations that had once relied solely on fear and dominance now explored new methods of cooperation. Trade agreements incorporated empathy-based negotiations. Defense protocols emphasized preservation of life and mutual understanding. Educational programs were established across planets to teach young leaders the value of patience, persistence, and the courage to act for others. Stories of the human soldier and the paralyzed alien warrior became lessons taught alongside traditional history and strategy, inspiring generations to come. Even in the farthest reaches of space, where humans had never before been seen, whispers of the story traveled. Observers recorded accounts of kindness and courage, sharing them with their communities. Entire cultures began to integrate the principles into their own practices, creating networks of cooperation that had previously seemed impossible. The ripples of a single choice now stretched across light years, touching lives in ways Kieran had never imagined. Despite all this, Kieran remained humble. They traveled quietly, intervening where necessary, guiding where help was requested, and leaving without fanfare. Recognition was not their goal. The impact of their actions was evident not in accolades or rewards, but in the changing hearts and minds of countless beings across the galaxy. Each system transformed by patience and empathy was a quiet victory, a confirmation that the simplest acts, one person refusing to abandon another, could shape history. The alien warrior, now a mentor and leader, occasionally visited Kieran, reporting on the continued progress of their programs and sharing stories of the cadets who were now leading initiatives on other worlds. "They learn quickly," the warrior said during one such meeting. "The children understand what we once could not. They are shaping a future that no one expected." Kieran nodded, watching the stars glow above them. "It is only the beginning," they said. "Every choice like ours, every act of care will continue to spread." That is how change grows. And so the galaxy continued to evolve. What had begun as a single act of courage, the decision of one human soldier to stay with a paralyzed alien warrior, had become a movement, an idea, a philosophy. Strength was no longer measured solely by physical power, victory, or fear. Across countless worlds, it was now understood that true strength comes from care, persistence, empathy, and the willingness to act when others refuse. Generations would learn from the story. Leaders, warriors, scholars, and children would carry the lesson forward, embedding it into the culture of their civilizations. Battles could still occur, but now strategies were informed by cooperation and understanding. Conflict could still exist, but the first step was no longer domination, it was connection. In the quiet moments, Kieran often thought of the warrior they had saved. Their bond, forged in patient care and mutual respect, had grown into a legacy far beyond what either could have imagined. And though Kieran traveled endlessly, moving from system to system, they understood the truth they had always known. The universe changes not by force alone, but by those who have the courage to stand, to care, and to refuse to abandon life when it is most vulnerable. The stars above shone brightly, each one a reminder of possibility, of hope, and of the quiet power that could ripple across worlds. And somewhere among them, Lieutenant Kieran Vale continued their journey, a single human whose simple choice had forever changed the galaxy, proving that one act of steadfast compassion could echo across light years and generations, shaping civilizations in ways that no weapon, ever could.